There's a question that sounds simple, the kind you'd ask a kid and expect a one-line answer. Who was the first king in human history? Google it. You'll get a name. Sometimes Sargon, sometimes Gilgamesh, sometimes some Egyptian pharaoh with a name you can't pronounce. But here's the problem. Every single answer is, in some way, a lie. Because when we ask who was the first king, we're picturing a moment. One person standing in front of a crowd saying, "From today, I rule you." And everyone just agreeing. That moment never happened, not the way we imagine it. The oldest name we have on record comes from a list that mixes real rulers with kings who supposedly reigned for tens of thousands of years, before a flood that may or may not have happened. The oldest body we have a real skeleton, in a real tomb, belonged to a man whose actual name we still don't know. We call him Scorpion. Not because that was his name, because that's the only symbol carved next to his remains that we could read. So the real question isn't who was the first king. It's this. How do you become first, when the very idea of a king had to be invented from nothing? To understand the full truth, we're going to break this down into 4 chapters, where the last chapter is the most unsettling of all. Chapter 1. The name everyone gets wrong. If you ask most people, they'll say Sargon of Akkad. And it's easy to see why. Sargon is dramatic. Sargon is a good story. Legend says he was born in secret, put in a basket and set adrift on a river, the same story structure you'll later hear about Moses centuries later. He grew up, became a cupbearer to a king, and then took the throne for himself. Around 2334 BCE, he built the world's first known empire, the Akkadian Empire, stretching across Mesopotamia. Sargon is real. Historians agree on that. His empire is real. His conquests are documented. But here's the catch. Sargon was not the first king. He wasn't even close. By the time Sargon was born, kingship in Mesopotamia was already over 1,000 years old. Cities like Uruk, Ur, and Kish already had dynasties, temples, palaces, written law. Sargon didn't invent kingship, he inherited a system that was already ancient by his time. So if Sargon isn't the answer, who came before him? That's where things stop being simple, because the next name we find isn't from an archaeological dig, it's from a list. And that list has a problem. Chapter 2. The list that breaks reality. The document is called the Sumerian King List. It's one of the oldest political documents ever discovered on record, carved onto clay, listing every king who ever ruled Sumer, going back to the very beginning. At the very top of that list is a name, Alulim, king of Eridu. Sounds like an answer, right? First name, first city, first king. Except the same document says Alulim ruled for 28,800 years, not 28 years. Not 280, 28,800 years. The kings listed after him aren't much better reigns of 10,000 years, 30,000 years, sometimes more until, according to the text, a great flood wipes everything out and kingship descends from heaven again, this time with numbers that finally start looking human. So what's going on here? Modern historians read this list not as literal history, but as political theology. Ancient Sumerian scribes weren't trying to record facts. They were trying to answer a much deeper question. Where does the right to rule actually come from? Their answer was, it doesn't come from strength. It doesn't come from wealth. It comes from the gods themselves. Kingship, in their worldview, wasn't invented by humans. It was sent down from heaven, like a gift or a burden placed onto one city, then passed to the next when that city fell. This is the first real clue about what a king actually was, at the very start of civilization. A king wasn't just a ruler. He was a claim that his power was cosmic, not political, not, I am strong so I rule, but the universe itself chose me. And once you understand that, the search for the first king changes completely. Because now you're not looking for the first strong man. You're looking for the first person who convinced an entire society that his power was sacred. And that search takes us away from myth, away from clay tablet legend, and into the dirt, into an actual tomb, where for the first time we stop reading stories and start reading bones. Chapter 3. The Man with No Name. In 1988, in a desert town in Egypt called Abydos, archaeologists opened a tomb known as Tomb UJ. Inside was a man, buried around 3320 BCE. That's over 5,000 years ago, nearly 1,000 years before Sargon was even born. He was buried with imported wine from the Levant, hundreds of ceremonial pots, ivory, and most importantly, a crook and flail. The exact royal symbols you picture when you imagine an Egyptian pharaoh, thousands of years before the pyramids existed. Next to his remains, archaeologists found something even more significant: small bone and ivory labels carved with symbols, some of the earliest writing ever discovered on Earth, older than most Sumerian script. We don't know his real name. The only symbol repeated near his burial resembles a scorpion, so historians simply call him Scorpion. Here's what makes this genuinely unsettling. This man predates the idea of a unified Egypt. He ruled before Egypt was one country. Before the famous Narmer, the king credited with unifying Upper and Lower Egypt even existed, which means a scorpion wasn't just a king. He may have been present at the exact moment kingship, as a concept, was being invented, tested, experimented with, built from nothing in real time by a society that had never had one before. Think about what that actually required. Before this man, there was no template, no handbook, no precedent for how do you make thousands of strangers accept that one man's word is law. Someone had to invent the mechanics of that, the rituals, the symbols, the writing system to record debts and taxes and grain, the architecture that made a palace feel different from a house. This wasn't inherited power, this was power being manufactured for the first time by trial and error. And that's the quiet horror hiding inside this story. We are not looking for a name, we're looking at the invention of an entire technology, the technology of obedience, and the man who built it left behind no name, no words we can translate, no explanation, just symbols and bones, and enough gold to tell us he mattered. So, who was the first king in human civilization? Sargon wasn't. He was just the first one loud enough for history to remember clearly. Alulim wasn't. He was a religious idea wearing a human name. Scorpion might have been, but we don't even know what he called himself. Here's the uncomfortable truth this whole search reveals. Civilization didn't wait for kingship to be invented before it began. Kingship was invented because civilization had already outgrown a world without it. Somewhere, thousands of years ago, enough humans gathered in one place, enough grain needed storing, enough disputes needed settling, enough labor needed organizing, that the absence of a ruler became more dangerous than the presence of one. And once that threshold was crossed, someone always stepped forward to fill it. We don't remember his name. We were never meant to. What we remember is the shape he left behind, the shape every civilization since has poured itself into, without ever asking why. So maybe the real question was never who was first? Maybe it's this: if the need for a ruler is old enough that we've lost his name, how sure are you that you'd recognize the moment it happens again?